Let me tell you something that nobody told you in school. While Europe was still figuring out what a nation even was, while kings were dying of infected teeth and peasants were being taxed for breathing, there was an empire in the heart of Africa that had already been running for 300 years. And it would keep running for another 700 after that. 1,000 years. One dynasty. One bloodline of kings called the Sayfawa, holding together a civilization so sophisticated, so layered, so deliberately engineered, that when the first European travelers finally stumbled into its courts in the 19th century, they found themselves being received with the kind of protocol that would not have looked out of place in Vienna or Constantinople. That empire was Kanem-Bornu, and the reason you don't know its name, the reason it never made it into your history textbook, never got a chapter, never got a paragraph, barely got a footnote, is not because it wasn't remarkable. It's because it was too remarkable, and that threatened something. But we'll get to that. First, let's go back. Let's go all the way back to the lake. Lake Chad sits in the center of Africa like a secret. Today it's shrinking. Climate change has eaten it back to a fraction of what it once was. But for most of human history, it was enormous. It was a world unto itself. And the peoples who gathered around it, who fished its edges and grazed their cattle along its shores and built their settlements in the rich floodplain soil, those peoples were not isolated. They were connected. The lake was not a wall. The lake was a highway. And from Lake Chad, trade routes radiated outward in every direction like spokes on a wheel. North into the Fezzan, into Libya, into the Mediterranean world. East toward the Nile Valley, toward Egypt, toward the ancient circuits of the Arab world. West into the Savannah, into the Hausa kingdoms, into the forest belt where cola nuts grew and gold moved. South into territories that European maps would later simply label unknown. The lake sat at the center of all of this, and whoever controlled the lake controlled the flow. The Proto-Kanemi state understood this early. By roughly 700 CE, when Charlemagne's grandfather was still fighting to hold together a crumbling Frankish kingdom, the Zagawa Confederacy north of Lake Chad was already building the institutional architecture of what would become one of the longest-lived dynasties in world history. They were not building it from nothing. The archaeological record at Dama Mound, excavated by Graham Kana in 1981, shows settlement continuity in this region going back to 500 BCE. More than 1,000 years before the Sayfawa dynasty formally consolidated power, people in the Lake Chad basin were already practicing iron metallurgy, managing grain storage in organized facilities, and producing pottery sequences sophisticated enough to trace cultural lineages across centuries. This was not a people without history. This was a people whose history we simply chose not to read. And when you sit with that phrase, chose not to read, it is worth being honest about what that choosing involved. It was not laziness. It was not ignorance. There were scholars in the 19th century who read Arabic, who had access to Ibn Furtu's chronicle, who held the Diwan in their hands. Heinrich Barth himself was one of the most meticulous scholars of his generation, and he published 5 volumes about what he found in the Central Sudan. The information existed. The record was available. What was unavailable, what was structurally prevented, was a framework for understanding that record as evidence of genuine civilizational achievement, rather than as the administrative habits of people who had not yet been modernized. The problem was never access, not the problem was interpretation, and interpretation is always political. Around 1068 CE, the same decade that William the Conqueror was busy redistributing England to his Norman friends, a Sayfawa king named Humai converted to Islam. This was not a sudden rupture. Islam had been moving through the Saharan trade networks for generations, carried by merchants and scholars along the same routes that carried gold and copper and cloth. The conversion was a political calculation as much as a spiritual one. It plugged Kanem into the most powerful intellectual and commercial network of the medieval world. Suddenly, Kanemi scholars were traveling to Cairo. Suddenly, letters were being exchanged with North African rulers. Suddenly, the Sayfawa court had access to Islamic jurisprudence, to astronomy, to mathematics, to the accumulated learning of a civilization that stretched from Spain to Central Asia. And here is something that stops me every time I think about it. Oxford University was founded somewhere between 1096 and 1167 CE. In roughly that same period, Kanem already had madrasa networks producing scholars who traveled internationally, corresponded with Al-Azhar in Cairo, debated Islamic law at a high level, and brought their learning back to a court that valued and funded it. We speak of Oxford as one of the great early universities of the world. We speak of it with reverence, and yet Kanem's parallel intellectual infrastructure, built at the same moment in the same historical breath, gets filed under oral tradition and left there. That is not an accident of scholarship. That is a choice. Let's talk about money, because this is where the colonial lie is perhaps most brazen, most economically convenient, and most thoroughly demolished by the actual evidence. One of the foundational myths of European colonialism, a myth that did enormous ideological work, that justified extraction and domination and the entire apparatus of civilizing mission, was the idea that African societies were pre-monetary, primitive, operating on gift exchange or barter, without the cognitive sophistication to abstract value into a medium of exchange, without, in other words, real economics. Heinrich Barth blew that myth apart in 1857, and he did it not with theory, but with receipts. Barth was a German scholar, genuinely rigorous, genuinely curious, and one of the best European observers of the African interior in the 19th century. And when he traveled through the Bornu markets, he did something simple and devastating. He wrote down the exchange rates. He sat in the markets of Kukawa, the last great Bornu capital, and he documented in precise detail the prices of goods in cowrie shells, in cloth strips called tobes, in copper bars, in salt slabs from the Saharan mines of Bilma. He found not a barter economy. He found a multi-denomination monetary system, calibrated, like any sophisticated monetary system, to different scales of transaction. Small purchases, cowries imported from the Maldive Islands in the Indian Ocean, carried by Arab merchants to the Persian Gulf, shipped across to North Africa, loaded onto Saharan caravans, and delivered to the markets of Bornu, where they functioned as the primary retail currency. Think about what that supply chain means. Think about the trust networks required. Think about the credit extended between the Maldivian shell collectors and the Moroccan middlemen and the Saharan caravan operators and the Kanuri merchants in the Bornu markets. That is not primitive exchange. That is an international monetary system. Medium transactions, cloth. The Diwan, the written administrative chronicle of the Sayfawa dynasty, records the state collecting taxes in standardized cloth units. Standardized. The state set the units. The state set the quality thresholds. This is not barter. This is fiscal abstraction. This is the same cognitive operation that European states were performing with silver coin. The medium is different. The sophistication is identical. Large transactions and long-distance trade, copper bars and natron. Natron is sodium carbonate, soda ash, mined from the deposits around Lake Chad. In Egypt, it was essential for mummification, for glassmaking, for soap production. Egyptian demand for natron from the Kanem-Bornu region was continuous and enormous, and that demand gave Bornu extraordinary leverage in its northern trade relationships. They weren't just selling a commodity. They were selling something irreplaceable, something Egypt needed, and they knew it. That is market power. That is economic statecraft. Paul Lovejoy spent years reconstructing the monetary architecture of the Central Sudan. The currencies, the exchange rates, the commodity circuits, the way value moved across space and time in this region. His findings, published across multiple works from 1974 onward, are comprehensive and clear. Bornu operated a complex, multi-currency economy integrated into both Saharan and sub-Saharan commercial circuits. Hogendorn and Johnson, in their landmark study of Cowrie shell money, mapped the distribution networks and identified Bornu as a critical node, a place where the Indian Ocean economy and the Mediterranean economy and the sub-Saharan economy all met and transacted. This was not the periphery of the medieval world economy. This was one of its hubs. Now let's talk about governance, because this is where the story gets truly extraordinary, and where the distance between what actually existed and what colonial historiography allowed people to believe becomes most vertiginous. The Sayfawa Mai, the king, was not an absolute despot. The image of the African king as a divine autocrat, answerable to no one, ruling by caprice and fear. That image served colonial purposes beautifully because it implied that these societies needed European law to save them from tyranny. The reality of Bornu was almost the precise opposite. The Mai operated within a constitutionally structured council system. There were 12 great dignitaries with defined roles. The Galadima functioned as a kind of prime minister. The Kaigama commanded the military. The Yarima governed the northern territories. Each office carried specific powers and specific limits. The Mai could not declare war unilaterally. He could not make major political decisions without council consultation. This is documented, not inferred, not reconstructed from fragments, but documented in writing. In Ibn Furtu's chronicle of Mai Idris Aloma's reign, written in the 1570s by a court scholar who was there and who recorded the institutional architecture he observed with the precision of a constitutional lawyer. And then there is the Gumsu. The Gumsu was the Queen Mother, and the Gumsu held formal constitutional power in succession disputes. In a system formally organized along patrilineal succession lines, the Queen Mother was the matrilineal check. She could contest, she could validate. She could, in moments of succession crisis, essentially determine the outcome. This is not a footnote. This is a structural feature of a constitutional monarchy, a built-in balancing mechanism that the Sayfawa dynasty maintained across centuries because it worked. When Idris Aloma came to power around 1571 CE, he inherited this system and then systematically upgraded every component of it. He did not dismantle the constitutional framework. He worked within it and used it to accomplish things that, by any contemporary global standard, were remarkable. He introduced Musketeers. He recruited Turkish firearms specialists, a direct product of his diplomatic relationship with the Ottoman Empire, and integrated them into a professional standing army. Not a feudal levy, not farmers called up for a campaign season, a professional army, salaried, specialized, standing year-round. He introduced pre-positioned supply depots along campaign routes. This is the kind of military logistics that military historians associate with the modernization of European warfare in the 17th century. Gustavus Adolphus, the 30 Years' War, the systematization of field supply. Idris Aloma was doing it in the 1570s in the Central Sudan, before any of that. Ibn Furtu records it. He records the supply chain. He records the depots. This is documented military logistics innovation occurring simultaneously with, and arguably preceding, its European equivalents. He built brick mosques, permanent, durable, architecturally ambitious mosques. This was a statement about the state's relationship to permanence, to infrastructure, to the future. You don't build in brick if you think of yourself as a temporary power. You build in brick when you intend to be here. He established a professional judiciary. Salaried qadis, judges trained in Maliki Islamic jurisprudence, operating as state officials, not feudal appointees, not personal retainers of powerful nobles. The law was to be applied consistently by trained professionals across the territory. Ibn Furtu records Idris Aloma personally attending courts to verify that sentences were being applied correctly. That is an executive monitoring a judicial system for compliance with legal standards. That is a rule of law model. Let's talk about diplomacy, because this is the dimension of Kanem Bornu's sophistication that is perhaps most startling when you sit with it. In the 1570s, Idris Aloma was conducting simultaneous diplomatic relationships with the Ottoman Empire, with the North African states of Tripoli and Fezzan, with the Hausa kingdoms to the west, and with various Saharan peoples to the north. He was not a local chieftain managing his immediate neighbors. He was operating on an international stage, balancing relationships, leveraging alliances, acquiring military technology through diplomatic channels, and projecting Bornu's power across a vast region through a combination of military force and diplomatic sophistication. When Heinrich Barth arrived in Kukawa in 1851, he was received at a court that had not forgotten how to conduct international relations. The Sheikh, the political successor to the Sayfawa structure, received Barth with a formal diplomatic protocol that Barth himself described in terms that made clear he was dealing with a sophisticated state apparatus, not a tribal chief. And then the Sheikh did something that should be more famous than it is. He sent a formal letter to Queen Victoria. Read that again. The ruler of Bornu sent a formal diplomatic letter to the Queen of England, as one sovereign to another, not as a supplicant, and not as a subject, as a peer. Barth carried the letter. Barth delivered it. The British government received it. They received it, and they filed it. And within 50 years, their successors would be using Maxim guns to erase the political entity that had sent it. But the letter exists. The intention behind it exists. The claim to sovereignty that it embodies exists. And no amount of subsequent colonial historiography can make that claim disappear, because the archive holds it. Now I want to talk about something harder. I want to talk about the end. Because how an empire ends matters as much as how it was built. And the story of Kanem Bornu's end has been told in a way that is specifically designed to do ideological work that serves colonial power. The story goes like this. Kanem Bornu declined. It weakened from within. Its institutions rotted. Its leaders lost their grip. And by the 19th century, it was essentially a hollow shell waiting to be swept away. This narrative is everywhere in the colonial literature. It does a very specific thing. It suggests that what the British found when they arrived was not a functioning sovereign state, but a decayed ruin, something that had already failed on its own terms, something that colonial administration was, in a sense, rescuing. This narrative is false, and it is false in a way that is very precise and very instructive. What actually happened? In 1804, Usman Dan Fodio launched the Fulani Jihad across the Hausa territories to the west of Bornu. The jihad was a genuine religious reform movement. There is no question about that. But it was also a massive political disruption that reorganized the entire political economy of the Central Sudan. As the Fulani forces swept through, they destabilized neighboring states, sent refugees across borders, disrupted trade routes that had operated for centuries, and created the conditions for cascading institutional stress throughout the region. Bornu was not a Fulani majority territory. It was not the jihad's target, but it was its neighbor, and the shockwaves hit it hard. The Sayfawa court, dealing with this unprecedented pressure, made what seemed like a reasonable decision. They invited a renowned Islamic scholar named Muhammad al-Amun al-Qanim to help organize the defense. Al-Qanim was brilliant. He was an effective military and political leader, and gradually, over decades, he accumulated power within the Bornu state structure until the Sayfawa were functionally displaced from actual governance, even as they retained ceremonial sovereignty. This is not internal decay. This is a state that survived external military pressure, survived it, and was then gradually hollowed out from within by a figure it had invited in. The parallel to colonial dynamics is uncomfortable and exact. An external actor, invited in under specific circumstances, gradually becomes the actual power, and the original sovereign retains only the form of authority, while the substance transfers elsewhere. Al-Qanim was not British, but the mechanism is recognizable. The Sayfawa dynasty formally ended in 1846 CE, when the last Mai was killed in a conflict with Al-Qanim's son. 1,000 years. And what ended it was not internal failure, but external shock compounded by political miscalculation, compounded by the kind of power drift that happens when a state under pressure reaches for outside help, and the outside help turns out to have its own agenda. That is not a story of African political incapacity. That is a story of geopolitical complexity operating at the highest level. So why don't we know this? That is the question that should be making you angry right now. Why, given the archaeological evidence, given the manuscript tradition, given the written chronicle of Ibn Furtu, given Barth's meticulous 5-volume account, given the Diwan that records 1,000 years of dynastic history, why does Qanim Bornu not occupy the place in world historical consciousness that it so clearly deserves? The answer is architectural. It was built into the structure of colonial knowledge production from the beginning. When British colonial administrators took formal control of the Lake Chad Basin between 1900 and 1903, they faced a problem. The problem was paperwork. There was too much of it. There were Diwan manuscripts recording centuries of sovereign history. There were letters. There were administrative documents. There were records of taxation and law and diplomacy that, if read correctly, established beyond any reasonable doubt that this region had been governed by sophisticated, literate, legally complex sovereign states for a very long time. That was inconvenient, because the legal and moral justification for colonial rule rested on a set of claims about the territories being colonized. The claims varied in their specifics, but they shared a common structure. These places were not really states. These peoples were not really governing themselves in a meaningful sense. European administration was therefore not conquest, but management, not dispossession, but development. If Qanim Bornu's documents were filed as state records, as the administrative archive of a sovereign entity, those claims collapsed. The legal fiction of terra nullius, of ungoverned space waiting for order, required that the evidence of prior governance be reclassified. And so it was. The Diwan manuscripts were collected. They were not destroyed. They were collected, which is its own kind of violence, and filed under anthropological categories. They became ethnographic materials. They became oral traditions transcribed in writing. The specific act of categorization stripped them of their evidentiary weight as state documents. They were studied eventually, but not as constitutions, not as law, not as the administrative record of a functioning sovereign polity, as cultural artifacts, as folklore elevated to literacy. This is what Miranda Fricker calls epistemic injustice. The same information, held by a European state, constitutes history. Held by an African state, it constitutes ethnography. The category determines the authority of the claim. And the category was chosen, deliberately, functionally, in service of specific material interests. Dirk Lang spent years working to undo this. His 1977 analysis of the Diwan, cross-referencing the dynastic chronicle against independent Islamic calendar records, against North African archival sources, against the internal consistency of the document itself, established beyond serious scholarly doubt that the Diwan is what it claims to be: a written administrative record of a real dynasty, verifiable against external evidence, accurate in its chronological structure. This is not legend. This is not myth. This is history. Graham Khanna's excavations gave the material culture its voice. The stratigraphy at Daima Mound does not lie. The pottery sequences are real. The ironworking evidence is real. The imported glazed ceramics at Ngazargamu are real. The Venetian glass beads are real. You cannot argue with a sherd of North African glazed pottery buried in a Bornu palace floor, so it got there somehow. The how is a story of connection, of commerce, of a civilization plugged into the world economy centuries before European contact. Paul Lovejoy gave the economics their framework: the Cowrie circuits, the cloth currency, the natron trade, the caravan volumes, the exchange rates. He built the case piece by piece, source by source, until the structure of Khanem Bornu's monetary economy was visible in enough detail to compare to any contemporary medieval European economy, and to compare favorably. What does it mean to restore this? It means more than just correcting the textbooks, though God knows the textbooks need correcting. It means recognizing that the story of Africa's past is a contested space. Contested not because the evidence is genuinely ambiguous, but because one reading of the evidence serves power and another reading threatens it. The reading that serves power says Africa had no history, had no states, had no law, had no money, had no sophisticated governance before Europeans arrived. The reading that threatens power says there were empires here of extraordinary complexity and duration, empires with constitutional structures and professional judiciaries and multi-currency economies and international diplomatic relationships, and those empires were dismantled, not because they failed, but because they stood in the way. Khanem Bornu stood in the way for 1,000 years, 1,000 years of kings, 1,000 years of law and trade and scholarship and diplomacy and military innovation and political survival against odds that would have broken most states in a generation. The Sayfawa survived the Bulala Wars. They survived the collapse of Khanem and rebuilt in Bornu. They survived the Moroccan disruption of their Western trade partners. They survived Fulani military pressure. They survived everything until the combination of internal political displacement and, ultimately, the arrival of a colonial power that had already decided, before it arrived, that what it was arriving to take was not a state, but a territory. The archive does not agree. The stratigraphy does not agree. The Cowrie exchange rates do not agree. The letter to Queen Victoria does not agree. Khanem Bornu was real. Its sophistication was real. Its 1,000 years were real. And the work now, the necessary, overdue, urgent work, is to put that reality back where it belongs. Not in the footnotes, not in the specialist journals that 11 people read. In the center of the story of human civilization, where it was always supposed to be. Because here is what a 1,000-year dynasty means. It means generation after generation of people who figured out how to live together, how to organize power, how to build institutions that outlasted any individual leader, how to connect to the world around them, how to adapt and survive and continue. It means a depth of human achievement, that should humble anyone who thinks that civilization has a geography, that it belongs to certain latitudes, certain peoples, certain skin tones. It means something else too. It means that the skills of statecraft, balancing council power against executive authority, calibrating military force against diplomatic finesse, designing legal institutions that outlive their founders, those skills are not the proprietary invention of any single civilization. They were developed independently by human beings solving human problems in the world they inhabited. The Sayfawa did not need a European tutor to understand that a standing army is more reliable than a seasonal levy, or that law applied inconsistently is no law at all. They wrote it down. They built institutions around it. Those institutions ran for 1,000 years. That is what the archive holds. What the sherd of North African glazed pottery in the Bornu palace floor is telling us. Civilization has no latitude. Kanem Bornu is the proof. We are digging it up now. We are digging it up now. We are digging it up now. We are digging it up now.